Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to do a second round of the same video because YouTube had a hissy fit on the first one. So we're going to do it again. Here's the deal. We're going to talk about pre-Fed banking, and this is 1910 to 1913. This is the Titanic to the Fed. Now, why are you even thinking about watching it? And for me, this is doing it the second time. Why are you thinking about watching this? Because it's important to President Trump. Why is it important? Here's why.
So, making America great again is one of the key statements, and people don't always understand what you mean. So, we always talk about 1870 to 1913.
So he's talking about it. They're having conversations left and right about this kind of thing. And if you're not having conversations about it, for instance, by the way, in between me recording the first video and YouTube having hissy fit about it, and the second video, Glenn Beck, who actually like some of the stuff, he's thinking about this and he's like, gold is going to go up to $5,000. And I'm like, yeah, so what's wrong with that, Glenn? And Glenn doesn't understand the point of the Fed dying because he's focused on the dollar. And I'm like, the dollar's dying, dude. You got to get over it, right? You've got to understand the dollar is going to die and it's going to be replaced by the Treasury. That's a good thing. We don't want the Fed to be involved anymore. We'll talk more about that later on. Here's what the central banks have always been about. We talked about this last time, but this is the framework of the conversation for the rest of this whole video.
The central banks, because they have the
bigger the bank, the more the power, but their power extends beyond just like their relations with other banks. Their power determines a lot of what happens in your country.
Yeah.
And they're not under the control of voters, right? So it's an extra democratic institution, which happens to be the most powerful, which is crazy. I'd love to know how that happened. But how do they feel about war?
Well, central banking and warfare are very closely linked. As I said, the modern major bank, the first modern major bank and central bank was the Bank of England, of course. And in the very act of Parliament, the law founding it, it says this institution and mechanism, because they didn't want resistance. They don't mention Bank of England. What we're doing here is establishing the Bank of England. They kept that secret. We're doing a new mechanism by these investors to raise and lend a lot of money to the government, namely by establishing a company. We'll be allowed to establish a company. That's the Bank of England. In order for what? In order to wage war. It was in order to make war. So they're closely linked. And of course, if you look
at its founding document, it says that.
Exactly, the Act of Parliament establishing the Bank of England, it said the purpose is to make war.
So in essence, what he's saying there is that Congress and the presidency, in our case, established the Fed in order to do what? To create wars. The 20th century is replete in setting up wars. So let's get into it here as we go through. So the pre-Fed banking, this is 1910 to 1913. We have to bounce a little bit back and forth wading through this conversation. Okay. So as we go through here, sorry, it kind of floats through here. April 15th, 1912. This is a little bit after some of the events that we'll talk about in a little bit. So we have to go back and forth as we're wading through the waters. Well, why are we wading through waters? Well, we're wading through waters because this is a very important date in history. See, I have been so focused over the years, and I never understood why. I would read every little book or booklet or video upon the Titanic, because there are some groups of people who believe that the Olympic carrier or the Olympic ship, who was created by the White Star Line as a sister ship, who actually has a very lucky history to the Titanic. It's really interesting. That is part of World War One and a little bit of World War Two. Real interesting, and you have to understand it. Now, some people believe that it was replaced. So it replaced the Titanic. Those people who believe that it was replaced by the Titanic, and I think the evidence a little bit goes toward that. If it replaced the Titanic because the Titanic was damaged, what that would mean, I'm going to take off the screen for half sec. Sorry. If the Olympic replaced the Titanic would have been damaged, which means that if the Titanic goes down from a monetary standpoint, what they would have lost having the Titanic going down would be $2.5 million they would have gotten in insurance money. But if the Olympic or a new ship would go down, they would have gotten $11 million. Well, that's a bigger payout. You see, it's all about money. They don't care about the people. There were 2,200 souls on the Titanic. 1,600 go down, and they were forced down. See, this is a really sick thing. See, 1,600 people don't care about, right? And so if you believe in the opposite viewpoint that it doesn't really matter about the Olympic or not, and it really was the Titanic going down, so they could accept the 2.5 million in that way, so okay, you want to go that direction or not. Here's one thing that we do know, that Guggenheim, Astor, and Levi Strauss, Isa Strauss. Think about these three actually Jewish men. Here's a really interesting point. Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor. Strauss is the Levi Strauss, or the jeans creator, right? These are very, very wealthy men. These are first-class passengers. Now, if you watch the famous movie of the Titanic, and you've studied anything about them, first-class passengers, the very first boys and girls that get off of the Titanic, why don't the rich people get off of the boat? I'll pause for a half second. It makes zero sense. They're clamoring to get off the boat. Why would these boys not get off the boat? There's no reason for that. Except, were they killed? Maybe were they killed beforehand? See, it really doesn't matter whether or not the Olympic was replaced in this way, or it was, this was really the Titanic or the Olympic. It doesn't really matter either way. It just would be more nefarious if this was the Olympic or it was the Titanic, either way. But here's one of the key elements that you do have to understand about this is J.P. Morgan, which actually created, and we'll find more about this boy, because you've heard a little bit about this, who created the Federal Reserve, who owns the Titanic, owns the Olympic, he owns the White Star Line, actually was supposed to be on the Titanic. And he doesn't get on. Now, go back to the story of the Titanic. Go to the beginning of the story. We have a boy named Jack, starting with a J. Interesting point, right? J.P. Morgan. Jack is gambling and he's in a gambling thing, and he's trying to win a ticket on the Titanic, and he wins a ticket. Other people don't win, and they lose their ticket to get on the Titanic. And when he's talking to Rose, he says it's the best thing that he ever did. He won a third-class ticket to get onto the Titanic, and other people don't get on the Titanic. See that interesting juxtapose point of getting on the Titanic. Cabal references always show up in movies, and what they do is they do a switcheroo kind of point. You see, that's what tells you how much truth is actually in movies. Okay. And this was not just any kind of movie. This thing blows through the box offices, right? Celine Dion actually sets a record for her music. Her music blows through. Many movies don't even make. I mean, many bits of many movies don't make as much money as the music that she does. I mean, it's a haunting melody. Even if you don't like Celine, you get my point. Even if you don't like her as a person, it's a gorgeous song, right? And it is a haunting melody with it too. And she is an amazing singer with it too. And yet that uh, it's a very, very well done movie with this stuff too. And it's a really powerful movie. But here's the point. It's got so many interesting Cabal references left and right. And here's the point of this. It kills off those guys who were against the Federal Reserve. Why is it that this actually is the case? Things that make you say, huh. And it sets up things that happen in 1912. This would be before the election time frame of 1912. Okay, let's move forward. Let me back up one step and pull this off the screen. At the same basic time frame, we have
Sinking of the Titanic. While the official story was that the Titanic collided with an iceberg.
And this just kind of gives you some of the background with this too. I'm muting the music because this would mess me up here. This says the same basic thing. You can kind of see this on TikTok over and over again. That the Titanic obviously, has a really weird history. When you look at it, J.P. Morgan was absolutely going to be on the ship, and he was supposed to be on the ship. Why wasn't he on the ship? He should have been on the ship, right? Okay. Okay, so let's move forward here. And we're going to talk about the three main candidates who were in the 1912 election. Okay. Number one, Wilson. There are three main points that Wilson was doing. This progressive spirit from 1890 to 1910. Wilson was bringing up the Clayton Act, the anti-monopoly law that he was trying to bring up. And it was the monopoly law. So now this sounds like a really good thing because, and by the way, Monopoly had come out, the game Monopoly had come out by no other than communist viewpoints. The communists that actually had come up with the game as an interesting idea. I want to just think about that for a second. Now, monopolies were created by industrialists. So he's coming up against something against industrialists who were creating the Federal Reserve. So, and when you realize, if you studied more about the industrialists, they're coming up with anti-industrialist points, but what they were really doing is taking out their competitors, because they were not going to be taken out themselves, but they were taking out their other competitors, their lower line competitors. That's one way to do it, right? Instead of taking out yourself, anyone below you, they were putting in their own people, but anyone below you that were out there, they were going to knock them down. You see, they were putting in Woodrow Wilson here, but they were going to knock out the rest of them. Now, Underwood tariffs were lowering the taxes on imports. So they were trying to reduce the taxes on imports, right? And what was that? That sounded like a really good idea. But why was it a good idea? Because what they were going to introduce in just a little bit is this income tax thing. You see, Trump is talking about this thing. So we're going in the opposite direction of Wilson. And then they were going to bring in the Federal Reserve System to stabilize banking. And see, some people don't understand because what they were doing is crushing. There was so much crush of the banking system that if you listen to the third one, we're in the fourth one, the third one of the pre-Fed banking, we had so much messiness in all the banking. So many people felt so crushed by the banking system because they had lost massive amounts of their own money. They were just, I mean, we're not talking about, we didn't have the FDIC, which FDIC seems like a good thing. See, people ask about the FDIC, like, that's good for me because I'm not going to lose my money. Well, who takes your money in FDIC? The only people that can access your money in the banking system are the bankers. Does that make any sense? Like, who has ever taken your money out of a bank? A bank. Okay. Now, by the way, who steals your money in a credit card? Normally, other, someone can steal your credit card, right, by some other credit card, they're credit card thieves, right? But has anyone ever stolen your money from a bank? Have you ever thought about that? No, they can take your check and they can steal a check and they can steal credit cards. And there's all kinds of thieves in that way. Was anyone ever stolen your money out of a bank account? No, it's never happened, really. And here's the reality is, guess who steals your money in a bank? Only time this ever really happens is a bank. Have you thought about that one? Okay. Now, let's move forward. The second candidate was Teddy Roosevelt. Now, he was the president years before. And he is a war hero. So he was a real interesting one. Who brought him in? The Cabal as well at the time. And then Taft was the secondary one. He was the Republican president of the time. So he was 1900 to 1908 to 1912. Okay. So here's what happens. The results were 42% popular vote, and he's number one in the Electoral College. We got Teddy Roosevelt in 27%, number two. And so we have a split vote kind of point going on in this way, right? Let's just show you a little bit of some of the campaign points that happens with Teddy Roosevelt. Very interesting background.
1912, after being ousted from the Republican Party, Theodore Roosevelt, the Bull Moose, still sought the presidency and created a new third party called the Progressive Party. While campaigning in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, John Schrank approached Roosevelt and shot him with a Colt revolver in the chest. Fortunately for Roosevelt, his metal eyeglass case and the fat paper of his speech prevented the bullet from fatally wounding him. Roosevelt, however, seemed unfazed with the shooting and instead insisted on proceeding to the auditorium to deliver his speech. When he got up there, he stated, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose."
And you see, he was a war hero, and that's one of the reasons he was definitely a man of the people of that time frame too. And so they really loved him with that too. Very hard to take out of that circumstance with that too. Okay. And then we have, so that's what we have. We have the split president. And think about that for a second. We have a splitting of the party. We'll talk about that a little bit more.
Theodore Roosevelt, yes, the man on Mount Rushmore, turned on his own party. After losing the Republican nomination to William Howard Taft, Roosevelt didn't back down. He formed his own Progressive Party, nicknamed the Bull Moose Party, and ran against Taft and the Democrats. The result? A split Republican vote that handed the presidency to Democrat Woodrow Wilson. Some say Roosevelt's ego cost the GOP decades of political dominance, while others argue he was fighting corruption in his own party. Here's the real debate. Was Roosevelt a traitor to his party or a hero who exposed its flaws? Drop your thoughts.
They are
And then you
not
got
alone,
Taft.
the unfortunate and the weak. They are the weak and the strong, the poor and the rich, and the many who are neither. The wage earner and the capitalist, the farmer and the professional man, the merchant and the manufacturer, the storekeeper and the clerk, the railroad manager and the employee. They all make up the people, and they all contribute to the running of the government, and they have not any of them given into the hands of anyone the mandate to speak for them as peculiarly the people's representative. Especially does not he represent them, who, assuming that only the people are the discontented, would stir them up against the remainder of those whose government alike this is. In other
So when you listen, when you look and you listen to Taft, one of the problems that happened with Taft, when you go back and look at him in history, he's a heavy man. He's playing golf. He was very aloof, where you had Teddy Roosevelt was the man of the people, a war president, war hero, really strong guy, and you have Woodrow Wilson, a man of the people, smart guy, but very much, had that charisma where, Taft didn't have it. When you listen to even that speech, if you couldn't hear it, I'm going to give you just a basic kind of point. He was like saying, I'm for everyone. Well, if you're for everyone, you're for no one, right? I mean, he was basically saying, I'm for the top to the bottom. Like, well, then you're for no one, right? So that makes zero sense in that circumstance. So Taft was never going to win. So what the cabal of the day were doing is pushing the agenda. Now, it's very interesting. This is in 1912. And when I was studying through this a little bit more here recently, and I was doing this about a week and a half ago when I was doing a lot of the research for this whole series, and I was putting together this part. 1912 is the exact 80-year mirroring to guess what time frame? 1992. What happens in 1992? You have another man of the people Democrat. You have another guy who is losing. He's got a 4-year term. And then you have a guy that is in the middle of circumstance. A 4-year term Republican that is losing the people, Poppy Bush, just exactly like Taft. He's already done his 4-year term. He's on the outs, but by the way, Poppy Bush, just like Taft, he's on the way out, but he was definitely part of that cabal, right? But who did the cabal of the future want? They wanted the man of the people, the one that they could control, Bill Clinton. What was the agitator of the circumstance, the one that was going to mess with the party of the right? The Ross Perot. When Ross Perot is the short guy that was standing in between, Poppy Bush, a tall man, Bill Clinton was a very tall man. When you put Ross Perot, it was like, the middle of parting of the sea. It was a very strange kind of thing. If you ever go back and look at it, and Ross Perot had that real nasally, he was a very annoying kind of, and he was a billionaire, by the way, too. and he was, and do you know that a lot of the people thought of Ross Perot and Donald Trump in the same breath many times, and they kind of put him aside, but Ross Perot stole a lot of the votes away. So that's what they were hoping for, that they would have a split vote kind of circumstance. Guess what they were hoping for again with Kamala and, the Kamala kind of circumstance along with Trump. So they were hoping that this circumstance might occur in 2024. I believe that's a very strong possibility for them. And they were hoping that that would come around. But again, Trump was a, in essence, a bull moose that was going to run over the top of them. They had no answer. They had nothing like this, and they were hoping for something like that. And frankly, if they want to say that Kamala got 72 million votes, there's no possible way she got 72 million. No possible way. Okay, let's move forward. Then came along the little brother of the 16th. Okay. This is the First Amendment. If you go and look through the amendments and read through them, the 16th Amendment makes zero sense. It is the most, laissez-faire of the writing of an amendment. Okay. And it was done in 1909. So says the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states without regard for census and enumeration. I mean, like, you're like, we get to go anywhere we want to go, whenever we want to do. Like, that's like saying we're going to go to Orlando and we're going to go to any place we want to go. Like, wait a second. Are you going to go to Disney World? Or are you going to go to Universal Studios? I mean, that's like the kids. I mean, that's like the dad we're going to Orlando and we're going to go to one of those theme parks, right? You're like, are we going to go to one of them? We only have a certain amount of money. We only have a certain amount of time to go to one of the theme parks, right? Like, that's how they wrote it. And it made so little sense. And it's the first time that they really, needed to get their butt kicked on this one. Because what happened is it was passed in 1909, but it needed to be ratified in the states. And it took 4 years for 3/4 of the states to happen. And they actually waited until New Mexico became the 36th state before it became ratified. And here's the interesting part. SCOTUS actually turned down the last income tax in 1895. You remember when I was talking to you in the very first one? If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to the first one of the series. And the $400 million that would have been more like about $10 billion that was ratified in 1863 and 1864 that brought on the Battle of Chattanooga, the Battle of Gettysburg, that drove the northern states all the way through, and I believe that won the northern battles that brought in Sherman into destroying Atlanta. And so when we have that circumstance that just overwhelmed the South, and what did it bring in? It brought in a northern income tax, and it was canceled out by SCOTUS in 1895. And so SCOTUS knocked it down, and not even 10 to 15 years later, almost 20, a little bit over 20 years later, they're pulling out an income tax again. See, it's almost like in these 10 to 25 year timeframes before they start to regenerate this kind of thing. So what happens is that what they do, the IRS was supposed to actually put in, so some of their little guidelines were this. From 1913 to 1933, what they said, and this is this is why the Woodrow Wilson was actually okay with this. He said, you know what, you can do this, but the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. This is how they were looking at this. I'm going to take this off the screen for half a sec. So think about this. Those earners who are the top earners. So let's just, for Scott math, if you're making $100,000, 1% of your money was going to go out there. So $1,000, and it's called 1040 because using that same kind of math, and I'll show you some of that. you were going to pay that amount of money. But almost no one else was doing this. And it was time locked at 1933. Now in 1933, there was a very interesting thing that occurred. So FDR actually instituted something where they took away the gold from the people, that there was a $10,000 fine. If you didn't give your gold, you were going to lose it all. Huh, interesting. So that same kind of thing occurs as well. Let's watch a little tiny video about that.
First of all, the federal income tax is completely unconstitutional, as it is a direct, unapportioned tax, and the required number of states needed in order to ratify the amendment to allow the income tax was never legally met, and this has even been cited in modern court cases. Second, at the present day, roughly 25% of the average worker's income is taken from them via this tax. That means you work 3 months out of the year to fulfill this tax obligation. And where does that money go? According to the Grace Commission report of the 1980s, 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt and by federal government contributions to transfer payments. In other words, all individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services which taxpayers expect from their government. Today, the money Americans make working 3 months out of the year goes almost entirely to the interest fees charged for the debt-based fiat currency. The fact is, the federal income tax exists to feed the Federal Reserve federal government money machine, making sure the interest payments are always there. And third, even with the government claim as to the legality of the income tax, there is still evidently no statute, no law in existence that requires you to pay this tax.
I really expected that, of course, there's a law that you can point to in the law book, the code, that requires you to file a tax return. Of course there is. I was at that point where I couldn't find the statute that clearly made a person liable, at least not me and most people I know. And I had no choice in my mind except to resign.
Based on the research that I did throughout the year 2000 and that I'm still doing, I have not found that law. I've asked Congress, we've asked a lot of people in the IRS commissioners, helpers. They can't answer, because if they answer, the American people are going to know that this whole thing is a fraud.
I haven't filed an federal income tax return since I left.
I have not filed a tax return since 1999.
That's what they're saying. Okay. So, sorry, let me bring this back up on the screen. It takes me a second there. Okay. Let's bring this back up on the stage. Okay, so let's move forward on the next phase here. So how was the Fed built? During the 1913 timeframe, what they did is the IRS comes on the stage in the same year that the Federal Reserve was actually passed in the dead of night during the Christmas break of 12/23/1913. It was signed into law by Wilson, and he said it was the worst thing that he ever did. So how does the IRS actually get its money? And we get this all the time. IRS gets its money. It takes in your, let's just make up a number, say you get $10,000 that you pay that $10,000, they take their little cut. Then you take the next level of cut. Treasury gets its amount. The Fed, Fed bankers take their 6%. It's in their statement. Then the debt gets paid. And here's the point. The debt is so high at $13 trillion, or excuse me, $37 trillion. And the interest rate is still set at 4.75 or something or other, that they don't have the ability to pay down on the interest. So when let's say, and there was a time where I had a credit card from the business that had $50,000, I could only pay on the interest of that credit card. There was no way I was paying into the principal payment. They're not paying into the principal. So when then they run out the money to the mint. Now, By the way, they haven't run any money into the mint for a very long time frame. Okay. So when they tell you that inflation is just a part of the system, that's just saying that they're, that's just part of apple pie kind of stuff. That's just how they try to tell you. Bah humbug. That's what fiat currency is all about. Okay. Many House members will excoriate the Fed, but here's the point. They will tell you that we need to know more about you, but they have never, ever been able to do anything. If they ever say anything bad about them, one of the things that they'll find out is they will never be back in Congress or Senate anytime soon. They are out on their ears. The Fed has never allowed any president to appoint, to do anything along with their lines of seeing their books. And it's pretty darn funny that Trump was inside of the Fed looking at talking about what they were doing. When Trump was inside there, along with a couple of his members, or his staff members, and they were looking at the insides of their area, he was basically telling you, I'm taking you down. You see, when you think back on your own history, pull this off the screen for a second. When you think back on your history, one of the things that you can go back and look at Obama's time frame, or Bush, or any other one that you want to think about. One of the things that on the 20th of January, after they do their obligatory stuff in front of the Capitol, they walk through their different things, they go through the tombs of the unknown soldier, they go through and they have the shooting off of the cannons, and then as they stop off, they actually stop off at the president or the governor of the Federal Reserve. They get their orders always, and I remember seeing this and kind of studying this, and I didn't really understand it. They always get their orders from the president of the Federal Reserve. And when that president of the Federal Reserve, he's at the end of his term, of course, the president of the United States has the opportunity to appoint the new president or the governor of the Federal Reserve. Yeah, that's just a perfunctory point. They actually run it. And when Reagan, in his time frame from 80 to 88, when he had made some conversations about what his budget was, Paul Volcker of that time frame, of the governor of the Federal Reserve, he said, man, I don't care what he does. We're the ones that make up the monetary policy of the United States, in essence, the world. And currently, a friend of mine who watches the news way more, I don't watch the news at all, he actually made a comment, and George said this to me, this is the actual wording that news agencies are saying. We need to have the independency that is preserved for the Fed. And I'm like, wait, George, what the heck are you talking about? An independency for the Fed? They're already independent agency. And he goes, I know. And I'm like, why are they even saying that? It's because they're terrified of what could happen to them. They know the end is coming. And by the way, good riddance. One of the things that I put on my my social media, especially Twitter specifically, is end the Fed and end the IRS. If you're in favor of that kind of stuff, what happens is we're going to see a switch out from the US dollar to the US Treasury note. It's going to be gold backed, and we're going to see that whole thing just switch instantaneously. It is going to be a really cool thing for us. It's going to be horrible for the cabal. All of those people have been doing wars. The wars and the rumors of wars have been exactly speculated, not just speculated, but told to you for generations. Matthew 24 has talked about that for a very long time frame. Guys, we know that time frame is their time frame has come to an end. It's going to be okay. I promise you this is going to be a really cool time frame. Be calm. Trump is about ready to flip the switch. Thank you so much.